Welcome back to another episode of Wine About Data. I am Amanda Lopez, president at Transform Consulting Group, and I'm joined today with our first guest ever, Julie Garber. Julie, please introduce yourself.
Thank you for having me. I'm Julie Garber. I'm the Vice President of Strategic Initiatives at the Community Foundation of Wabash County.
Great. Well, winers, we are excited to be back with you to talk about Wine About Data. And the reason why we've started to invite in some guests is we know that there's a lot of pain points out there with everybody as it relates to data. And so Julie is going to be talking with us today about, as a funder and a foundation, what are the ways that foundations are using data to make decisions? And also, what are the maybe challenges and pain points that you see in the grantees who you partner and support? So before we dig into that matter, Julie, let's talk about our wine today that we have. So I love to go up to Lake Michigan. We have a lake house up there, and there's this whole region of wineries. And so I've been trying out different wines. So we picked this white wine, and it's warm, summerish starting, and it's an Albarino, which I don't remember exactly what it is, except I think it's a blend. So let's have a drink and see what it tastes like.
That's nice and dry.
Yes.
Really
I know
refreshing.
you said you were preferring more of a drier wine for whites, which I do too.
And what makes Michigan such a great place to grow dry wines?
I know when we have talked to some wineries there, when you look at the latitude line for where Southwest Michigan is, it's like the perfect region for getting rain breeze from the lake and then also enough warmth. So they're able to grow a lot of grapes there. Interestingly, now they also do bring in, grapes from like Washington or California and then make the wineries there. But within a 30-mile radius of where we visit, there's like over 30 wineries.
Wow.
So if you haven't been up to Michigan, I encourage you to go.
I love wines from Argentina, those high ranges.
Yes.
And this tastes a little
it has like a little bit of that note. So, but you're welcome to join us with whatever drink you want to have in your cup. So whether that's a wine or a coffee, we are glad to have you here. So what are we whining about today, Julie? Well, today we're going to talk about funders and how they use data, right? And some of the common pitfalls. So I was really excited when you agreed to come on the podcast. So thank you for saying yes, and hopefully maybe encourage some of our other viewers who want to join us. We love it at TCG working with philanthropic partners, foundations like yours, because we have worked together. We just see you being a critical role in the community, not only in helping to shore up a gap of funding and providing a financial resource to many social issues, but also being a convener, bringing a lot of partners together around common issues, and also being a thought leader and tackling emerging issues happening in a community. And so our philanthropic partners just add a lot of great opportunity and knowledge and resource in communities. So thanks for joining us here. So how about if we just start with our first question of, how do you use data at your foundation?
Well, when you introduced that topic, I thought about when I first arrived at the Community Foundation, the director of the foundation reminded me numerous times, we don't do programs. We are a donor-driven organization. We do what donors need and try to help them with their philanthropy. But as we grew and we had more and more unrestricted money to use for grant making and local impact, we began to make this transition to programmatic. And then at the same time, all of that was shifting from what I would call charity work, where you do what donors want to do charitably and you send checks out to organizations and you have no idea whether it had any impact. You're just doing what a donor asked you to do. And that's an important thing.
Right.
We were supporting universities and people's churches and their favorite charities. But when we were using our own unrestricted money to make an impact in the community, we began to see it as a philanthropy, a matter of philanthropy. And so then it became important to know or have at least an idea of what impact you were going to have by spending this money. And then that's where the data became important.
Yeah, that sounds a lot there to unpack and a journey. And I think it's a journey that a lot of foundations have been going through in the last 10 to 20 years, really trying to understand where can you have profound impact. And that word, I think, can mean a lot to different people. So how has data helped give clarity and focus to the impact that your foundation wants to have?
We ask our grantees to provide us with basically a case statement, what we want to do, how we think it will impact the community, and use that as the basis on which to make a grant. For an example, we have done scholarships for years. Donors want to set up a scholarship. And so, of course, often they want to help the student who is disadvantaged or who doesn't have as many opportunities or comes from a first-generation family. But when it came down to it, we weren't able to make those grants very effectively because those students who are characterized in that way had already opted out of the idea of going to college by about the 8th grade.
So like your applicant pool was really limited.
Yes. We ended up giving scholarships that were meant for disadvantaged students to students who were going to go to college anyway. And so we developed a program based on data that would get resources to students at a younger age in order to influence their vision of themselves as a college-going or career-focused person.
Yeah. Because when you were really like discovering and unpacking like what is happening, right? Where are they coming out of the pipeline, if you will, of being on there? The data, the research said you needed to go earlier.
Right.
Because having that access to financial young kept them in the pipeline. Is that
right? Yes. Yeah. Just the idea that they had assets was mind-changing. And it affected parents as well.
Wow.
So, many times you have a first-generation family, and if you can convince a student to go to college, that's great. But if you can convince the parents that it's a worthwhile investment because they're the ones who may end up with the debt.
Right.
So,
well, and I'm sure, anybody who's gone through organizational change, right? Some people are resistant to change because they have this idea that you do it this way.
Right.
And so I wonder, was there any resistance with, board or staff or partners when you started to transition? You're still doing charity work, but leaning into this role of philanthropy and bigger impact work.
We do reserve some of our resource for the type of grant that would serve a very critical need without, homelessness. We're not taking the time to find out what would have the greatest impact on changing the situation of homelessness. We have people who need a place to go.
Right.
So while we would like to make a systemic change regarding that, and we do invest in that through Advantage Housing and other nonprofits, but we also have immediate grants for immediate needs.
Right.
So you can do both. You can meet an immediate need and look to the future.
And I think what I'm hearing from you too, and maybe it's a tip for our listeners as, foundations or even nonprofit leaders, have clarity, right? So like there are so many issues in our community and you have a finite amount of resources. In your case, hopefully yours are growing, right? And your financial assets that's part of the work that you're doing. But, where can you have the greatest impact? And so your foundation has really leaned into education as kind of that sector, that you're still funding other immediate needs, but that's like the impact, the data that you're trying to move the needle.
That scholarship program is being studied by the University of Michigan for more data on its effectiveness. And
Speaking my language here,
what
Julie.
they've been able to show is that students who participate in the program do better on standardized testing in reading and math.
Wow.
They are more social and emotionally stable. And there's a component of it where we give a match to parents who will save into a 529. And through that project, we can show that low-income families save more and they save more often in that program, which was a huge win for us.
Yeah.
Because it shows engagement of those families.
Right.
That everybody wants to do better.
Right. That's so exciting, Julie. And so I can't remember when the foundation started the Promise work, which is the initiative that this is all around.
2014 or so.
If we have students yet ready that are going to move on to that next post-secondary chapter, right? Because that's ultimately that big goal.
Yes.
Of getting more students that you could give scholarships to or who would be staying in the pipeline of post-secondary educational attainment.
the 6th, 7th, and 8th graders who started the first year in
Yes.
about 2015 are now going to college.
Wow.
We've not had a student who was exposed to the whole 5 years.
Yeah.
But that's coming up.
Okay.
And we're excited to see that. And now Michigan is starting to study those who have gone off to college.
Right.
And they're tracking them for the next
right.
number of years to see.
So what
people
I
go.
love hearing you is that you have some long-term outcomes and indicators, right? You have a partner who's helping you collect that data, but you're also tracking things. You have milestones along the way. So all that seems very attainable for what another organization could do, and something that we recommend, to have that like moonshot goal that we're all like wanting to have big impact for, but then we have these key milestones along the way to see are people on track and are we making progress?
And that excites donors too, to the project. So
something that you can bring in more people or maybe give more because there's that clarity of focus and an impact that you wanted to have.
Right.
Well, let's transition a little bit and, think about those grantees, those community-based organizations that you're partnering with. What are some of the, challenges or pitfalls that maybe you see, the struggles that nonprofits have when it comes to data and telling their story to funders, maybe when they want to ask for a grant or other resources?
We have wonderful nonprofits, and there are a lot of them. And I think they're the great passions of many people. They have a passion to do something.
Right.
Those passionate people are driving these projects, and yet they don't have very much experience as an organization. And so one way that we can help them is not only to give them grants, but to do capacity building with them.
Yeah.
We, on several fronts, we're developing a set of workshops that organizations can use to strengthen themselves and to use other groups like yours to come in and do some of that work with them. And also giving them support along the way of writing grants. So it's a competitive process. We only have a finite amount of money.
Yeah.
However, I don't treat the application process as terribly competitive. I ask groups to call me first.
Yes.
So let's talk about what you want to do.
So it's really relational.
Yes. And I don't want to have my committee read uninformed applications that are not going to be funded.
Want to try to make sure it's a good fit from the beginning and help them, really shape and align what they're wanting to accomplish with your organization's mission and the needs in the community.
So our application is a little bit like any kind of organizational plan where you have inputs and outputs, and they don't know that. We've
let
it in
go.
a way that's just more friendly, I think. But what do you want to change by doing this work? And how will you know that you've done it when it's over? And they have trouble. Anybody would have trouble expressing things in a quantitative way.
Right. So, when you're working with humans, we're messy, and that's pretty much what everyone's in the business of.
Yeah. So I think I've mentioned to you that when I get an application for a backpack program, for instance, and we say, describe your program, we want to feed children. Well,
which is a great, noble thing to do, right? We know there's hungry kids.
So we ask then, how do you know that there's a need in the community?
Yeah.
Children are hungry. That's the response.
That's the response.
Yeah. And so what are you going to do? We're going to feed children. And and how will you know that it was successful? Children will have been fed. So we're just working on making that a little more sophisticated.
Right. So tell me, if we were just to use that example, that backpack feeding program example, what would make it a more compelling ask? What would be the kind of data that you would want to see in a grantee in that application?
Well, we want to know how many children will be affected, and are you using any kind of screen? They used to use free and reduced lunch. Some of our groups now are saying they're just making it available to everyone, but doing a younger age group. And then I want to know from them what would be more effective. How could they, for instance, give kids better calories? Not only food, but how can you get better calories?
Quality, right? So
how can you get more protein in your meals at the amount of money you have to do it?
Right.
And also, what impact does it have in the classroom? So can the teacher do some sort of before and after? Just how do they do on scores on math?
Right.
For instance, beforehand when they didn't have these calories over the weekend, and on Monday morning, what are their test scores like?
Right.
and then with the food.
Yeah.
It's not terribly scientific.
Right. But there's a lot of research that talks about, when children are hungry, right, they will fall asleep. They're less likely to pay attention. They might even have behavior issues too.
Yes, right.
Right. And there might be some social issues, and all that can affect, focus and classroom, which might show up in the scores. So just, it sounds like you're wanting to help link to some impact.
Yes.
So what I heard you talk about is like, okay, what's the reach? Who are we reaching? What are some measures to show quality? So not just feeding, but like helping to have a nutritious, well-rounded diet, and then trying to tie it to some change impact. Like, how does this feeding children matter? How is it helping children?
We know that those lunches or meals over the weekend get cannibalized by older brothers and sisters and sometimes parents. So I've asked a number of them, why don't you do a family meal? Why don't you pack ramen and I don't know, whatever, to make a whole family meal so that everybody eats, and it's not just the child.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. So,
well, that's a great example. I think what the episode right before this, we talked with Rose, one of our colleagues, about how to use data and writing grants. So we have a lot of great tips and resources there that we've talked about how to really use your data to help frame the need. Again, why are you existing in your community, and what's the need that you're meeting? And then what's the change, the impact that you want to have as a result of this service or this intervention? And it sounds like that's what you want to see.
Yes. Another important question I ask people is, who else in the community is doing this?
Yeah.
Often the person with a passion thinks they're the only ones doing it.
It's a new need, or there's nobody solving this problem.
Yes. So, it's an opportunity to say, could we work together?
Yes.
Yeah.
So funders too are really looking for that collaboration with partners coming together collectively, around that, and maybe have greater impact because of that. Well, Julie, our time is going fast. So I know that we need to recap what we've learned and discussed today. So we have covered a lot of content for our listeners, both on what a foundation could do to use data internally with your funding, but also how you're supporting your nonprofit grantee partners. So if you were to give just one tip to our whiners, what would you tell them of, that you would like to see more of how organizations are using data?
Well, in the development of their ideas for grants and projects, the data is so important to know about need, and also to align your project with what others are doing. I think we're seeing more and more kind of cross-sector collaborations.
I do too.
Yeah. And I think the data will bear that out. And it's so much more efficient in terms of grant making and putting resources out there that will be used well.
That's great. Well, those are some great challenges that you put out there to our listeners. So what's next on our Wine About Data podcast? So we encourage you to follow along. Julie is going to be our first of many guests coming up on our podcast that we're going to come in to share their story of how data is important to them and their organization, and some best practices or tips and suggestions to share along. So you do not want to miss out on these conversations. So in the meantime, Julie, let's cheers to the great work at the Community Foundation of Wabash County.
Cheers.
Thanks so much for coming. And cheers to our listeners. We hope that you are transforming the world in many ways, and that we've given you one less thing to whine about today.